So I suppose the ask that I was given was really around, I think it starts to pull together a lot of what we've heard over the course of today in terms of, okay, there's a lot of inspirational ideas and thinking we've heard. What can business tangibly do to start moving forward with that? But I suppose taking a step back, that the context that sits around this and how does that change the way we think about business? And the ask of the fourth industrial revolution often gets clouded with jargon, clouded with Internet of Things and a whole host of other words. And I think when you trace it back, it starts to make a bit more sense. We think about the steam engine, we think about the rise of electricity and how that changed fundamentally and radically the way we all work. Now, the next step of that was then digitization. How did the internet, how did email, for all of its woes and sins, make communications faster and better? I think the thing you're seeing in this context is all of those things coming together where technology and the physical world are combining in a way they didn't before. Walking through a retail store in a way that technology can track our every movement at the end of the frontier really starts changing what becomes possible in the world of business. And I think there's three trends that sit around that are worth us reflecting on a bit, and then talking about what we've seen businesses do to really start embracing that. First of those really being changing the way they do business and make money. The shifts of consumer behaviors, consumer preferences, and as we started to see earlier, what does that mean as well for our employees? And finally, thinking about that against a lot of the talent and the labor backdrop we've talked about over the course of today. And I suppose you start with the fact that all of this is making new business models possible, that actually no longer is that barrier there, or the delineation as hard between the world of social good and the world of business. All of these are enabling new jobs, new ways of accessing services, but each of them also have their threats and the risks that we have to consider. Whether that be the rise of e-commerce, whether that be the rise of whole new industries of business process outsourcing, of software development, and thinking about how the sharing economy from Uber to a host of other things is changing the world of work. And that's not just a kind of business landscape and a trends backdrop. Consumers are asking for something fundamentally different. The kind of research that was done a couple of years back, and the latest version said the same, was that actually consumers want to pay more for sustainable brands. And kind of it's not been that long where you've heard the sense that that's true in London, it's true in New York, it's true in Tokyo. But actually the income dynamics, the country is making less and less of a difference. Everyone is demanding more from business than they ever were before. And that is true, as we saw of the insurance example earlier, that's true as well of employees. That sense of connectedness to purpose is fundamentally becoming an ask of what businesses do, and if it frankly is required in order to stay competitive. And I suppose the other thing you look at that against is a labor backdrop that at times can appear startling, but at the same time can be a huge opportunity for businesses. Levels of unemployment, and you start looking at it in terms of the way in which this is going to shift the skills that are required. And it both presents kind of a huge opportunity to take the unemployed, skill them up, train them with the skills we need for the future. And actually that as well is essential to business continuing to operate, continuing to stay competitive. And so kind of the ask that I was given was to think about, so how do businesses respond to this? And I think you've seen many examples of what people are doing, and just want to start pulling that together. I have broken the holy grail rule of consulting in not sharing a 2x2. But what I did want to talk about was kind of two things at play. There is kind of a business model angle to this, which in plain English speak, how do you fundamentally make money as a company? And what we'll go on to talk about is companies are fundamentally changing that to respond to all of these. And that barrier is really shifting between doing CSI work and being part of the core business. And at the same time, all of that is both requiring, and the trends we've talked about are enabling companies to operate in different ways. So we'll talk about what that means as well in terms of rethinking the structures of the organization, which 5-10 years down the line will look very different to what they look like today. and also rethinking the workforce and how you manage and what you need in that context. So I suppose the first thing I wanted to talk about was a bit around this, and it's a theme that's been touched on a little today, the theme of impact orientation. And I think you see this scale from, okay, there's a kind of CSI initiative that exists, through to our whole business is fundamentally about contributing solutions. And as you look at a lot of what we'll talk about today, it's really important to consider the far right of the extreme is not for everyone, but actually aligning what you're thinking about in terms of social impact with where the CEO, where the board is, really is a crucial aspect to thinking about how you respond to these challenges. And what is it that you need to do to stay competitive and relevant? And I suppose in light of a lot of these trends, what we see is fundamentally different ways at the start of this of making money. So we talked about the fourth industrial revolution and what it's enabling. And what you'll see here is some of the trends that exist along this, whether that's people in the internet, Internet of Things, whether that's big data, different ways of managing workforce and labor. And actually, all of these examples have an element that's both good business, but also good for society. Picking on a couple, I don't know how many people have been on a boda in Kampala, but frankly, it can be terrifying at times. And the example of Safe Motos, which is really thinking about how do we put more safety, security around that? How do we make sure that every driver that turns up is to a certain standard with a helmet? It will still be terrifying, but it will take the edge off a little bit more. And I think you see other examples here, Airtel looking at cloud phones, the issue of if access isn't as big, okay, how is it if someone else has a mobile phone that you can log into your account and use that as though it was your own? It opens up a whole new market, a whole new customer base, and at the same time expands access to internet and to services in a way that really wouldn't have been possible without these new technologies. And I think this is a thing where you have a real strong social impact in the things you do here. Some of the other examples on here, the rise of 3D printing and how that's changing fundamentally how we do medical procedures and run those things. Intelligent greenhouses, how is agriculture on the continent being transformed as we get better data, better insights, ultimately able to make better growing decisions? And what you'll see is this is applicable to everyone from the biggest and largest organizations, and is also something that startups are increasingly starting to eat away at those big companies through this type of thing. The other side of this, as you think about these trends, is a lot of the change in the world is enabling two things. One is it's enabling people to launch those new business models in quicker, faster ways than ever before. On the other side, it's also enabling people to work more efficiently for almost the sake of doing so. And kind of what we're increasingly seeing is organizations thinking differently about how they organize, how they structure, in ways that are going to be fundamentally different. We talk about organizations becoming more augmented and enhanced, and I think there is a big sense and a big fear that the rise of technology will eradicate jobs. And it will, but it will also create new ones. And it will also equip the people that we do have to be more effective to change the way they're interacting with customers, with stakeholders, in a way that actually augments rather than replaces the human being. The example we talked about of bank tellers, actually they become more important as your customer touch point, as your sales vehicle, not for doing process-driven transactional tasks. And we see that the examples of 7-Eleven, who fundamentally put data and insight into the hands of people in the store and let them make decisions. Actually, they know best that in a particular store, there is something going on in the community that will change what they need in stock next week. And taking that kind of and really putting it in the hands of the worker is making huge changes to the way businesses run. They're also letting go, in this living and agile way, of a formal structure. The days of sales and marketing as distinct functions are increasingly blurring and increasingly dissolving. And I think you see that in various contexts. You look at the example that pioneered this was Spotify, who think about bringing together all the various disciplines you need to get stuff done, and all of those work as a single team, regardless of functional boundaries. And everyone often goes, is that for me? Is that for my business? And then you also look at examples like BP, who are doing this on oil rigs in a context where the risks are much higher. And really thinking about how do engineers work better with other disciplines and really enabling the world to work faster and work more quickly. You see the rise of the extended workforce. We've talked a bit about partnerships today. The example of Philips, who have done a lot of work around how do they partner with NGOs, how do they partner with ministries of health to really improve the health system. Now, clearly there's something in it for Philips. The prospect of selling more medical equipment, but ultimately what it's enabling is better healthcare delivery in communities and where the patients are. That sense of both there's something to gain for the business and something to gain for society at large, and that only by tapping into that do they stay competitive. And I think the final one, we've touched on many examples, we've touched on Zappos today and a whole load of others, that shift to a much more authentic, purpose-driven business and the way you interact with your employees, with your customers. That demand for sustainability does require businesses to think differently around how they run their organization. And with all of that, as you adopt your structures and you think differently about how do you organize, also the people in the seats will shift and will evolve. And increasingly, businesses are having to take on the responsibility for preparing those for that. And I suppose what you see here is that evolving nature of work. And you look at agriculture as a particular example where you go from very kind of hands-on manual work to an increasing level of commerciality and eventually an increasing level of technology-driven mechanized farming. Actually, jobs shift to become more around agro-processing. It requires more digital skills in the hands of every worker. And in almost every industry, that's becoming true. And I think as businesses think about responding to this, the reality is there's jobs today that we didn't know were going to exist 10 or 20 years ago. And actually, the ability to predict where skills need to be is incredibly difficult. Now, there's work that you can do to start that, but one of the most important things around this becomes how do we create the transferable skills, the ability to learn in employees in a way that equips them to really be able to continue to adapt and grow. And with that, you're seeing businesses think more about, okay, soft skills within our training environments. You're thinking about how does training and learning become more bite-sized, and how actually is this also expanding beyond our core workforce. We've touched a lot on the education sector today, and actually businesses have a business case in training and bringing in more new talent. And I suppose when you look at this, it also becomes both, again, social benefit, but also a real commercial need to do this well. So those three things really pull together a lot of big and fundamental change that businesses are seeing. And there's a need both to, one, think about your business model and your customers and what they want. And quite often that is evolving, that's adapting, and there's a need to respond really quickly. Thinking too about how you rethink your structures in a way that enables you to work quicker and also enables you to take advantage of everything that's going on out there. And the third, thinking more and more about how does our investment go into talent, learning and development in its various guises within our workforce and also beyond. And I suppose all of that starts to look really incredibly daunting. And it's true, the pace of change is never going to be this slow ever again. I think what we're increasingly seeing is that this is not about huge one-off monumental changes. Actually, the business world has to adapt on a continuous basis, which gives you both an opportunity to start small, to prove stuff, to scale it and pilot it, and really taking approaches that designers have taken for years to really think about these challenges. And the reality is there's kind of no other way, because actually the increasing levels of uncertainty that you see, the fact that actually there's consumer preferences that are evolving so quickly that your own workforce can't keep up unless you really get close to that consumer base. All of that enables you to start, to pilot, to iterate and adapt. And really, you start with a focused project and problem, and then prove it and scale it from there. So I think that touches really on kind of both what you can do, but also thinking about how you change the way you do it. Thank you very much.